We are not just predicting the future, we are actively building it. This quarter, our margins have broken every record, and this is only the beginning.
Richard Whitfield had one job that night: save his company in front of 9 million viewers. Instead, he humiliated a waitress on live television, and by the time the cameras cut, it was his own empire on the floor. In the next hour, you are going to watch a billionaire challenge a black waitress over dinner, never expecting the challenge to grow into a bet worth millions. He was wrong about her from the very first question. And what happened by morning was never supposed to reach a single camera, let alone 9 million of them. Before we go back to the beginning, if you have not subscribed to Odyssey Stories yet, now is the moment. Stories like this one, ordinary people who get underestimated and then prove everyone wrong, come out every single week on this channel. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Now, let us go back to the night this all started. Michelle Carter had been on her feet for 6 hours before the dinner service even began. She worked the floor of one of Manhattan's most expensive hotel restaurants, the kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than her weekly grocery bill. She was 34 years old, and she moved through that dining room the way a person moves through a place they have stopped being impressed by. What most people at the restaurant did not know about Michelle was that she filled her quiet moments between tables with numbers. While waiting on a slow order from the kitchen, she would silently work through mental math puzzles, just to keep her mind sharp, dividing the night's total receipts in her head, calculating tip percentages before the machine could, turning a boring wait into a private game only she was playing. She also had a habit of repeating something her mother used to tell her whenever life felt unfair. Her mother used to say that a closed door only means you are standing in the wrong hallway. Michelle had leaned on that phrase more times than she could count. That evening, before her shift even reached the difficult table, she noticed a younger server named Priya near tears in the back hallway after dropping a full tray in front of a demanding guest. Michelle did not lecture her. She simply took the broom from her hands, cleaned up the mess herself, and told her something her mother would have said. "You are not your worst 5 seconds," Michelle told her. "Go breathe, then go back out there like it never happened." It was a small moment, but it revealed who Michelle Carter was before the night ever tested her. She was steady. She noticed people. She carried other people's weight quietly, long before anyone offered to carry hers. Her manager, a man named Marcus Bell, had worked beside her for 6 years and trusted her with the tables that mattered most. That night, Marcus stopped her near the kitchen doors. "You picking up Grace tonight, or is your sister getting her?" he asked. "Me," Michelle said, allowing herself a small, tired smile. Parent-teacher conference got moved again. At this point, I think the school just enjoys rearranging my whole week for fun. It was a small joke, dry and quick, but it told the truth about her life without needing to explain it further. Michelle Carter was a single mother, raising a 10-year-old daughter named Grace, working long shifts to keep them both afloat, and doing it all while carrying a mind that nobody in that dining room had ever bothered to notice. That night, the restaurant had a private reservation for 12. The party belonged to Whitfield Capital, one of the largest investment firms in the country, and its founder, Richard Whitfield, was hosting a pre-summit dinner for his top executives and a handful of major investors. Whitfield was 52 years old, and on the surface he looked like a man completely in control. In reality, his company was under enormous pressure. Whitfield Capital had lost 3 major institutional investors over the previous 2 quarters, and tomorrow's live summit was not simply a celebration. It was an attempt to convince the remaining investors not to walk away before the fund collapsed further. Whitfield had spent weeks rehearsing confidence he did not fully feel. Beside him sat Victoria Lane, his second in command, a woman known across the firm for being sharp and unshakable. Victoria had climbed to her position after years of watching leadership teams make careless mistakes in public, and she genuinely believed her job was to protect the company from exactly that kind of exposure. She was not cruel for the sake of it. She had thousands of employees depending on Whitfield Capital's stability, and she had learned the hard way that one bad headline could put all of their jobs at risk. Near the far end of the table sat Daniel Osei, the head of analytics, a quieter man who spent more time listening than speaking. As the dinner went on, Whitfield noticed Michelle moving through the room with a kind of quiet precision that caught his attention, partly out of boredom and partly out of the restlessness that came from knowing tomorrow's summit could make or break his company. He decided to test her privately, away from the rest of the table, as she refilled his water glass. "Let me ask you something," Whitfield said, lowering his voice slightly. "If I invested $100,000 at an annual return of 7%, compounded monthly, how much would that be worth in 15 years? He expected hesitation. He expected her to laugh it off, or guess, or admit she did not know. Instead, Michelle answered him within seconds, correct down to the estimated figure, and then quietly finished pouring his water as though nothing unusual had happened. Whitfield sat back slightly, more intrigued than he wanted to admit. He asked her a second question, a little harder this time, about risk-adjusted returns. Again, she answered without hesitation, precise and unbothered. By the third question, Whitfield was no longer testing her out of boredom. He was genuinely curious. He gestured her closer and, quieter still, asked how someone with her clear ability ended up working the floor of a restaurant instead of a trading desk. Michelle gave him a brief, guarded answer about school and family circumstances, unwilling to hand a stranger her whole story over a water refill. It was only after this private exchange that Whitfield's attention shifted from curiosity to spectacle. Wine loosened his judgment, and the presence of investors at the table gave him an audience he could not resist performing for. He raised his voice, calling the table's attention to what had just happened, and turned Michelle's quiet competence into a public show. "I just watched this woman solve compound interest problems faster than half my analysts," he announced to the table, half laughing. "I am starting to think anyone with a sharp mind could do their job." Daniel, who had already noticed Michelle's composure earlier in the evening, leaned forward. Victoria, sensing where this was heading, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but it was too late. The investors at the table were amused, and Whitfield was enjoying being the center of that amusement. What began as a private moment of curiosity escalated quickly into something much bigger. Whitfield, now performing for the entire table, offered Michelle a public dare. If she could review the real investment model his firm was presenting at tomorrow's live summit and find something his own team of analysts had missed, he would pay her $1 million on camera during the broadcast. If she failed, or embarrassed him in front of the cameras, he made it clear the hotel's contract with his company would be terminated immediately, and with it, the job that fed her daughter. Victoria objected right away, calling the idea reckless. Whitfield overruled her, caught up in his own momentum. He thought he was buying good television. He had no idea he was about to lose control of his own company. Michelle stood there for a long moment. It was not fear that kept her still. It was calculation. She understood exactly what a moment like this could cost a black woman standing in a room built to make her feel small. She also understood exactly what $1 million could fix in her life, and in her daughter's future. "Send me the file," she said quietly. If a moment like that has ever happened to you, being underestimated in a room full of people who thought they were smarter than you, type the word "seen" in the comments below. I want to know how many of you have lived through something like this. Michelle was no stranger to being underestimated. 15 years earlier, she had been a mathematics scholarship student with a full academic future in front of her, until her mother became seriously ill and she made the decision to withdraw from school and come home to care for her. Nobody in that dining room knew that story. Nobody had ever asked. She was not new to being brilliant. She was only new to being noticed. That night, after her shift ended and Grace was asleep, Michelle sat at her kitchen table with the file Daniel had sent her glowing on an old laptop screen. At first, the numbers seemed ordinary. She moved through the model with the same confidence she had shown at the dinner table, expecting to find a small technical flaw at most, something minor enough to satisfy the dare without causing real trouble for anyone. But an hour in, something in the risk calculations did not sit right. She stopped, rubbed her eyes, and told herself she was overthinking it after a long shift. She went back to the beginning and checked her arithmetic twice, certain she had simply misread a formula. She had not. Still unwilling to trust the conclusion forming in her mind, Michelle pulled up older quarterly reports to compare the numbers against real market history. For a while, doubt crept in. She began to wonder if she had lost her sharpness after all these years away from formal study, if perhaps the version of herself that once excelled at this had faded more than she realized. She almost closed the laptop twice, but her mother's voice returned to her, the same words she had leaned on her whole life. A closed door only means you are standing in the wrong hallway. She kept going. By the third pass through the model, the pattern became undeniable. Buried inside Whitfield Capital's investment model was a miscalculation in how the firm measured its risk exposure on one of its largest client funds. The number had been wrong for months, hidden underneath an assumption that no one on the analytics team had thought to question. If left uncorrected, and if it became public in the wrong way, it had the potential to shake investor confidence across the entire firm. At almost the exact same hour, unable to sleep, because something about the fund's numbers had been quietly bothering him for weeks, Daniel opened the same file at his own kitchen table. He found the same inconsistency Michelle had found, arriving at it through his own long process of doubt and double-checking. Neither of them yet knew the other had reached the same conclusion. The next morning brought a different kind of tension. Victoria Lane, still uneasy about the entire situation, tried to have Michelle quietly removed from the guest list for the live summit. In her mind, this was not cruelty. It was protection. She had seen unpredictable moments destroy company reputations before, and she was not willing to risk thousands of jobs on a stranger's unproven claim, however talented she seemed at a dinner table. You cannot put an unknown woman with no credentials in front of 9 million viewers and our biggest investors, Victoria warned Whitfield. If this goes wrong, it is not just your reputation on the line, it is every single person who works for this company. Whitfield hesitated for the first time since the dare began. He was not simply arrogant in that moment. He was scared, though he would never admit it out loud, aware that his company's survival depended on tomorrow going well. Still, something about Michelle's calm certainty the night before had stayed with him. "That is exactly why I am putting her in front of them," he finally said, though his voice carried less confidence than it had the night before. He had no idea what she had actually found. Back at home that same morning, before the chaos of the coming day began, Grace sat beside her mother at the kitchen table, working through her fourth-grade math homework, unaware that the woman helping her had spent the entire night decoding a multi-million-dollar financial model. "Mummy, why do you like numbers so much?" Grace asked. "Because numbers do not lie," Michelle told her, managing a tired smile despite everything weighing on her. "People do. Now finish your fractions before I have to solve your homework and mine." That single line would echo through everything that happened later that day. By mid-morning, Michelle arrived at the summit venue, only to discover her guest credentials had mysteriously gone missing at the check-in desk, an inconvenience that conveniently threatened to keep her out of the building entirely before the cameras ever went live. Daniel, sensing something was wrong, personally intervened and got her inside, just before the doors closed to the public. Someone in that building did not want the truth on camera. They were about to get it anyway. We are halfway through tonight's story, and this is where everything changes. If Odyssey Stories has earned a subscribe from you so far, now is the time, because what happens in the next 30 minutes gets caught live, on air, in front of the entire world. The summit began exactly on schedule. Cameras rolled across the packed auditorium, streaming live to millions of viewers around the country. Richard Whitfield stepped onto the stage with practiced confidence, introducing what he called a special surprise moment for the broadcast, framing it as a feel-good story about giving an ordinary person a chance. He handed Michelle the investment model in front of the entire room, in front of investors, journalists, and a live stream chat scrolling faster by the second. For a brief moment, standing under those lights, Michelle felt the same doubt that had crept in during the night before. She thought of her mother's words one final time, steadied her breathing, and began to speak. "Your risk model assumes a default rate that has not been accurate in 11 months, she said, calm and clear. "If I am reading this correctly, your actual exposure is nearly 3 times higher than what your own team presented to investors last quarter." The room went completely still. Victoria attempted to interrupt, still believing she was protecting the company by shutting the moment down. But with cameras rolling and investors already reacting, Whitfield had no choice but to let Michelle continue. Daniel stood from his seat and publicly confirmed her findings, revealing that he had independently discovered the same error the night before. Investors began pulling out their phones, checking the numbers in real time against the live market data on the screens behind the stage. The chat exploded with reactions. On the broadcast graphics, the company's stock ticker began to move as institutional investors reacted live to what was unfolding in front of them. He built this summit to save his stock price. Instead, millions of people were about to watch the truth save it for him, whether he wanted it saved that way or not. In the chaos that followed, the earlier story about Michelle's missing credentials came out on camera, when Daniel mentioned how close she had come to being kept out of the building entirely. Victoria, cornered, tried to explain that she had only been trying to protect the company from unnecessary risk, and for the first time, the audience watching at home could see that she believed that completely. It did not make the moment less damaging for her, but it made her human in a way she had not been an hour earlier. Whitfield stood at the center of it all, cornered live in front of 9 million viewers. He had 2 choices playing out in real time: honor the $1 million dare he had made the night before, or expose himself as a man who had tried to publicly humiliate a working mother for entertainment. There was no version of this ending where he stayed comfortable. The only question left was how much dignity he would lose on the way down. Part 4. Whitfield paid the $1 million on camera, visibly smaller than he had been an hour earlier. But the real turning point of the night was not the money. Michelle turned to face the camera directly, not for sympathy, and not for applause. "I am not telling you this so you feel sorry for me," she said. "I am telling you this so the next person like me does not have to win a bet just to be believed." The room fell silent in a different way this time, not from shock, but from recognition. Within minutes, live on air, the ripple effects began. Competing firms publicly reached out with offers. A university announced live during the broadcast that it was reinstating the scholarship she had left behind 15 years earlier. At home, Grace watched the entire moment unfold on a video call with her mother, overwhelmed with pride at what she was seeing. By the time the summit ended, Richard Whitfield had technically saved his stock price, but everyone watching knew exactly who had actually saved it. Several months later, life looked different for almost everyone touched by that night. Michelle enrolled back into the university that had reinstated her scholarship, finishing coursework in the evenings after her shifts, determined to complete the mathematics degree she had set aside 15 years earlier. She kept her old habit of solving small puzzles in quiet moments, though now those quiet moments happened between lectures instead of between tables. Grace, prouder than ever, stood in front of her entire 4th grade class during a family career day and introduced her mother, not as a waitress, and not as a headline, but simply as the smartest person she knew. Michelle stood in the back of that classroom, fighting back tears she never expected to cry over a school assignment. Marcus Bell received a promotion to regional manager shortly after the story spread, largely because of how visibly he had supported his staff through the entire ordeal, a quiet reminder that loyalty rarely goes unnoticed forever. As for Richard Whitfield, the aftermath forced a kind of reflection he had never experienced before. Whitfield Capital publicly announced new hiring and review practices in the months that followed, designed to identify overlooked talent within its own ranks rather than waiting for a public spectacle to reveal it. Whitfield himself gave a brief interview admitting that the entire ordeal had exposed blind spots in his own leadership that no earnings report ever could. He walked into that summit, trying to control the story. He walked out, having become a lesson in someone else's, and months later, he was still learning from it. If this story moved you tonight, that is exactly why Odyssey Stories exists. We tell the stories of people who get underestimated and prove the room wrong. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now and turn on notifications, because next week's story might be the one that hits closest to home. Drop a comment and let us know what part of tonight's story stayed with you the most. We read every single one.